Good afternoon. How are you doing? I'm doing a little book. I won't call it a review because I don't really write reviews or anything like that. Just a response to a book that I've read recently, which I very, very much enjoyed. And the book is The Unhouse. Hope you can see that. By Cally Starforth Hill, who many of you will know through the videos she's been doing in support of talking about Nurse Lucy Letby case. And from her Substack, wonderful Substack articles on her Substack called Essays on the Edge. I'll put the links down below and the link to this book. Yeah, so this is quite a short book, really. I've got to take my glasses off to read. Getting really long-sighted, so it's about 160 pages long. Lovely clear text, really nicely set out. And as it says on the description on Amazon, it could be enjoyed and would be enjoyed by children, perhaps of a certain age, probably. I don't know where you make that division. I don't know how they do it in publishing, but probably slightly older rather than very young, I would guess. But then this is the weird thing with books like The Unhouse and books like The Hobbit, for example, or Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, or Alice in Wonderland would be the classic thing, really. They transcend notions of that they're a children's book or they're for adults. It's sort of, it kind of breaks through that idea that it's one or the other, and I think it's I don't think it's a hard and fast rule anyway, really. There's probably many other books that you could apply that to, and there are transition phases in people's reading in which they're still very youngish, and they're reading books that are deemed quote-unquote adult books, and then now you've got this whole world of what they're calling young adult books, which is a relatively recent thing as a publishing idea, isn't it, and as a genre, I suppose. Just having a coffee. But I'm doing this video to talk about this book, which I thought was fantastic, and it's incredibly imaginative writing. It really is. I've never come across a book, and I loved Alice in Wonderland, for example, but this kind of, it's in that kind of lineage, it's in that kind of tradition, but it takes it that much further in terms of how imaginative you can be with language, with characters, with the visuals of what's going on, with describing seemingly impossible events in a world that then has its own inherent logic to it. And the last thing I want to do, obviously, is give away any of the story, because that would be like a cardinal sin. It would spoil the book. I think you can read it on Kindle and on a paperback. It's got a lovely cover there. It's got a lovely cover. Dreams are one of is the central. Dreams and dreaming, what dreams mean, what they might mean, what they might be trying to tell us. How do we find out the meaning of dreams, especially from the position of a child, but not just from the position of a child, what a child thinks dreaming is and what dreams are, but for any of us, all of us, really. What are dreams in our lives? What are they trying to tell us? What's the meaning of them? What is that state of dreaming? What is its relationship to being awake? How might dreams inform us, teach us, and give us hints, clues as to how we should best live, how we should understand very difficult issues and understand others, understand other people and the world at large. So there's elements of fantasy here, but then depends how you look at it. This is also the exploration of mind, and the imagination, fancy, as it was once called. It's very poetical in places. There's a lot of humour in it. Some of it quite scatological humour, but then it becomes much more subtle humour. There's a whole range of kind of registers and voices that run through this book, and dipping into kind of physics, from the scientific aspects to bits of poetry, bits of song, figures from folklore and fantasy and myth. A unicorn without a horn, or a mermaid that is frightened of water. These kind of oppositional kind of characters that are signs and symbols of a world of the folkloric world, the world of the imagination and of dream, but it's often very slightly askew, not quite the same. A sense of the uncanny runs through it as well, I would say. And it's, in terms of how it begins, how it's set up, it's a person that is, you'd say, you find out they're male pretty soon, but I wasn't sure at the beginning, right at the very beginning, but they're in their middle age, and they're coming home to where they grew up, to a village called Sleepycroft. I'll read a very short excerpt of it here, just give you a sense of this right at the beginning, that they return to Sleepycroft, where they grew up with their family, but unfortunately mum was elsewhere, but they grew up with a boy called Ivan, grew up with a younger brother and older sister, and also had a female friend. So, and then it kind of very deftly, and without almost realizing it, you're in the world of the much younger Ivan, who's 12 years old, and he's telling you about what Sleepycroft was like at the time when he was 12, and the adventures that he goes on, and the quest that he goes on to seek to get hold of this magic pillow that will tell him, that is said to be able to tell him the meaning of his dreams, and that's the quest that he's on. I'll just read this little bit from the beginning, just as the framing narrative, I think, as it's called, before you get into the story proper, really, but it's how it's framed as. It's called The Return, chapter 1. This morning I returned to my childhood home for the first time in 25 years. I'd left there at 18 years old for the big city to find work as an actor, and since my family had also moved on, I had not looked back. But something made me turn off the motorway en route to visit my sister in Wales, and I found myself drawn to my old home, the village of Sleepycroft. I'd got out of my car and found the path, which I remembered led through woodland to the river, which flows through the outskirts of the village. As I walked, the story of my childhood came flooding back to me. It was on the riverbank, here, that I had embarked on a very strange and unforgettable journey. And it was here that the weird greenhouse and the equally peculiar red house, which so often haunted my memories, had been situated, and I was driven by curiosity to see if either of the buildings were still standing. Rumour had it at the time that somewhere inside the red house was a magic pillow, and that anyone who lay their head on this pillow, who went to sleep, would, upon wakening, know the real and hidden meaning behind their dreams, and from that day on have the ability to correctly interpret them. Now, I won't read too much in one go, otherwise it will spoil it at the beginning. There's a little bit about Sleepycroft here, just the essence of what the memory of that place where Ivan and his family grew up, minus mum. At a certain point, mum's not there. Sleepycroft anyway was, and I guess still is, not a normal village. Looking back, I would say that the place gave the impression it had been marooned from the rest of the human race and evolved separately. Certainly when I was a child, the adults seemed strange. In fact, most of the adults in the village, including my dad, were sleepy. Most, if not all of the time, but some were more sleepy than others, and it was the others that you had to beware of. And for this reason, as a child growing up in Sleepycroft, when I had problems, I tended to keep them to myself rather than confide in any of the adults would generally yawn before I'd even managed to open my mouth. So it's a little taster it's about a return to a place, I suppose, of innocence and of growing up, in order to explore, perhaps, to tell the story of how Ivan was changed through this adventure. It would be very easy to slip into giving something away here, so I want to be careful about that. There's certain elements that come into here which are to do with understanding the mind of another person, and also like figments of the mind, not just pertaining to that person but to everyone, that figments of persona, and also the way we're supposed to live, and we're supposed to live within so-called reality, and these figments are kind of personified in this adventure. As I'm just going to look at the back of it here, because I'm not going to give anything away, but there's certain, there are certain characters in the book. Just as an example, there's a character that comes up in the book. It's called Reality as It Is. Sorry, Reality as It Really Is. There's another one called Square Peg, for example. I'm not going to say who they are because I don't want to give anything away. And true meaning. So these ideas, these kind of qualifying concepts become fleshed out into characters, and quite mythical characters sometimes, and some of them are animals, or many of them are animals actually, or some mixture of animal and human. And I found the ending of it really moving and haunting. There's a lot of playfulness in the book, a lot of playfulness in the language, and that's, to me, was what pulled me along most of all, just the freedom of the imagination of the writer, and therefore you give yourself over to it. You're not in a state where you're thinking, oh, that's impossible, because you're in a world where, similar to, and I'm not saying it's anything like it, but similar to Alice in Wonderland is, or the Wizard of Oz actually, we're not in Kansas anymore, but there are rules. There are certain kind of rules, as there are in dreams. There's kind of as I put in some words I wrote about it on Amazon and on Goodreads, there's a kind of logicality, but it's illogical. It seems unreasonable, but there's a reason. It's just a different kind of reasoning going on that makes sense of this world. It's not as the world is, but it has its own rules. You just got to discover what they are. And without wanting to give anything away again, it's just the idea that the import, the meaning of dreams, and that they're not necessarily, you need to discover, no, I was just about to go there, but when we get impressions from dreams, it might be that we don't understand the full meaning of them because we're not connecting them to other dreams. I'll leave it at that because I don't want to give away any of the reveals, as it were. But this village is a brilliant creation in and of itself, as are the people and the beings, the greenhouse and then the red house, as is the sense of as is the evocation of the child's sensibilities and desire to get to the truth of something, to get to the truth of dreams, to get to the truth of their understanding of themselves. Because Ivan, as the main character, is taking us through. And I mentioned in the other thing I wrote about it, there's a little hints of like Pilgrim's Progress in there. The idea, because there's a kind of helpful character that helps Ivan as he goes on this journey. A supporting character, a guide, as it were. Sometimes they're split apart, and sometimes they come back together again. And he's a really, really good character in the book as well. But I really recommend it, and it's on Amazon, and I got it. And for me, I read really slowly these days, and I really like I'm reading anything, I'm reading 3 or 4 pages a day, and that's how I like to do it. Which means I don't read a huge amount, but I'm just consistently reading little bits, you know. And this book, I'd like similar to when I read The Secret Garden. When was that? I can't remember exactly when I finished that, but with this one, I had the same sensation as I know I was coming to the end, and I thought I don't want it to end in a sense. And I always find that's a nice feeling that you get an attachment to it. You get attachment to the world, but it does. It resolves and it reaches its. I don't know whether to call it an ending, but it reaches its. Obviously, it physically ends. You know, it's the last page, but it reaches where it leaves off in a way that is quite. I found moving really, and raises further questions about Ivan and his family per se. But that's for the reader perhaps to wonder about. You don't have to have everything spelt out. So it's working on more than one level, I felt. Hence it being open to children or younger people and adults. But then sometimes there's just a false division between the idea of, oh, this is where books stop for children, this is where they start for adults, and it's a false demarcation, I think, in some ways, or kind of there's an arbitrariness about that in there. So yeah, there's a lot of humour in it. Some of it's childlike humour, and then there's other humour strands, and that are much more subtle. So they kind of interweave these different sensibilities from the characters, but from Ivan himself, because being 12/13 on the way to 13, he's in a sort of transitional phase himself of growing up, and he's a very engaging character to bring you along with him on this journey, because he's incredibly curious and there's a lot of tendernesses here in the book that is revealed, tendernesses for animals and creatures in particular, but sensitivities to the world at large. And you know, as was intimated in that little bit I read out there, the idea that, you know, you can be a very curious young person or older person, and you can find the world kind of at large generally kind of pushes the door against that and doesn't want you asking too many questions, doesn't want you to find out. So it's kind of, it's drenched in symbolism, it seems to me, as well. But then once you're in that world of symbol, then you're reading it, that's just the world you accept, even though they are, it's you know, it's the opposite of the realist novel, or it's the opposite of realism. So I think maybe that's all I wanted to say about it. I think I could carry on talking about it, but I think that I'd be at risk of giving away something which would spoil it for another reader. But I thought it was great, and I really recommend this book, which is on Amazon. I think you can get it there as a Kindle, but I'll leave the link below so you can see it, and I'll leave Cally Starforth Hill's link to her Substack as well, Essays on the Edge, and to her YouTube account, Solomon Sounds. And yeah, I'm really glad I read it. And I know Cally Starforth Hill has written other books as well, as well as all her many excellent essays. So I thought this is an excellent book, and it's unlike any book I've ever read, actually. So it's a very unique voice, and you know, it's coming out of certain traditions, I think, and which is, it's inevitable. We all do. Everything's out of other things, and that's where we are with all literature and art, I think, and all to the good. That's the richness of it. That's the kind of ocean that writers are in, really, aren't they? Inevitably and joyfully to bring in, you know, ideas of, you know, you're constantly nodding to whole worlds of folklore, old stories, religious texts, scientific text, whatever it happens to be, other sort of fantasy or type novels or folklore or sort of, yeah, I don't want to witter on too much, but you know what I mean. It's all part of tradition. I think that's the way I look at it, and I think that's all to the good, and that's what. But then you're always adding in something new, and that's the voice. That's the voice of the writer, and whatever magic happens when you get that flow going, and you get a character that you can warm to, both in the writing and for the reader's perspective, and the relationships between the characters. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed it, and I'll leave it there. And thank you very much, Cally Starforth Hill, for writing this book, and I thought it was great. Thank you, and thank you for listening. Take care, and have a lovely rest of the evening. Bye for now.